My name is Naomi André, and we are starting day 2 of the Afro-Diasporic Forum. Good morning, everyone. And yay, you're in the chat. This is terrific. Please, for those of you who are new today, open up your chat, your question and answers, your Slack, and just be in touch with us, and we will see this. This is wonderful. Okay, that was my first item of business. And then the other thing I want to say is just give you a quick overview of what we're doing right now for our panel. This is Libretti, Words and Text. And I will say a few words outlining the panel, provide a little history behind it. And then each of our 3 wonderful panelists will give opening statements. We'll then have a conversation among the panel, and then we'll weave in questions and comments from you that we see in the chat, the QA, and the Slack. From one of the very first planning meetings for organizing this forum, even as the operatic works on the program were being finalized and falling into place, I was interested in having a panel that would focus on some aspect of the libretto and the librettist. I wanted to bring librettists together to talk about a part of opera that tends to receive far too little attention: the role of the librettist, both in the past with canonic repertory and with current opera. The way that the words come to be wedded to the music deserves discussion. As an opera scholar who has worked with the traditional canon, it is almost embarrassing how little emphasis is given to the people who write the words, the text of operas. Even today, we tend to focus on the music and the composer, particularly when we assign authorship to a work. This is an opera by Mozart, by Verdi, by Philip Glass, by Missy Mazzoli, by Anthony Davis. Sometimes we know the name of the librettist and we just don't say it. Frequently, we do not even know or can't remember the librettist's name. The issue of the importance of the relationship between the words and the music go back to the very beginning of the invention of opera. From the earliest days of opera in the beginning of the 17th century, there are many debates around the movement from the prima pratica, the first practice, where there were multiple simultaneously sounding voices in the style of Renaissance polyphony, and the changing harmonic rules and emphasis on a single voice of the seconda pratica, the second practice, that began early Baroque opera, sort of at the end of the 16th into the beginning of the 17th century. One of the big debates that arose around this new genre of opera was the importance of being able to understand the text and the different relationships between the music and the text. In fact, around this time, at the beginning of the 17th century, there was a published debate where music theorists from Bologna, Giovanni Maria Artusi, accused Claudio Monteverdi of bringing music down with this newer style. Monteverdi is the earliest opera composer for whom we have our first few full operas. Monteverdi's first well-known opera, L'Orfeo, with a libretto by Alessandro Sriggio, was first performed in Mantua in 1607. And we know a bit about this opera because it was later published in 1611. Regarding opera, Monteverdi wrote that it was prima le parole, poi la musica. First the words, then the music. This matter about the relationship between the text and the music continued, and we have a few of what I'm going to call meta operas about this topic, where the very subject of the opera asks the questions around the importance of poetry and music. Antonio Salieri has one of these meta operas. And yes, I'm referring to that Salieri, who was an older colleague, frequently painted as a rival to Mozart, because Salieri was the Kapellmeister in Vienna, as well as the director of Italian opera. In 1786, the same year as the Mozart da Ponte Marriage of Figaro, Salieri wrote an opera, Prima la musica e poi le parole. First the music and then the words, with the librettist Giovanni Battista Casti. And this opera was commissioned by the Emperor Joseph II, who was one of Maria Theresa's sons of that wonderful sort of Viennese music supporting dynasty from the Habsburg family. Salieri's Prima la musica e poi le parole was first performed in Vienna in 1786. The second meta opera was written in the first half of the 20th century, Capriccio, a conversation piece for music. This is Opus 85 from 1942, and it's the final opera of Richard Strauss, with a libretto by Clemens Krauss. And the libretto was based on earlier ideas by Stefan Zweig and Joseph Gregor from a scenario in the 1930s. I want to make just two more quick points before we hear from our panelists. And the first is just an FYI. In the heyday of the 19th century, where opera was indeed a bustling public industry and not a private or court tradition, there were public and court-sponsored, yet open to the public opera houses in the 19th century. The norm in Italy at this time was for the librettist, also who was called il poeta, the poet, to be a resident at an opera house. He was connected to a theater for new commissions. And yes, it was all the ones I've found have been men in this time. A great example to explore this just a little bit is Giuseppe Verdi, as his career spans the 1840s through the 1890s, especially from his earlier operas that inherited the primo Ottocento tradition, the early 19th century tradition of Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, and many others. The house that commissioned Giuseppe Verdi determined the librettist he would work with. Francesca Maria Piave was Il Poeta at La Fenice in Venice, and Verdi worked with him for his operas that were commissioned and premiered there. These are Ernani, Rigoletto, Traviata, and Simon Boccanegra. Verdi was comfortable with working with Piave, and they also collaborated on several other libretti that were for other houses up through 1862. And their last libretto together was for La Forza del Destino that premiered in St. Petersburg. They stopped collaborating because Piave died in 1865. The second point I want to make is that the exception to the rule in repertory opera, that we always forget the librettist, is that for certain celebrated collaborations between composers and librettists, we'll remember who the librettist is. And I'll mention just three, and I think they're probably the three best known in the canonic repertory opera. Lorenzo da Ponte and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had three operas together: Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro, from 1786, Don Giovanni from 1787, and Così fan tutte. The second celebrated librettist composer collaboration is Arrigo Boito and Giuseppe Verdi. Sadly, not Francesco Piave, even though Verdi and Piave have the most libretti together. The attention goes to these operas, which started with, the first time they worked together, Boito and Verdi, was a revision of a Piave libretto, Simon Boccanegra, originally from 1857, but revised in 1881, several years after Piave had passed. But the two most well-known operas, and for Boccanegra, it was the council chamber scene that Boito and Verdi really worked on for the revision. The best known operas between the celebrated pair, Boito and Verdi, were Otello from 1887 and Falstaff from 1893. These were Verdi's last two operas. And a lot of us think, oh, if only they had met and began collaborating earlier. The third and last collaboration that's usually very celebrated is with Hugo von Hofmannsthal and Richard Strauss. They started with Elektra in 1909, and then their other operas include Der Rosenkavalier, Ariadne auf Naxos, Die Frau ohne Schatten, The Woman Without a Shadow, and Die Ägyptische Helena, the Egyptian Helena, that was first performed in 1928, revised a few times, the last in 1940, and then Arabella from 1933. So I wanted to share just a little bit of this history of opera composers, librettists, and this theme of what comes first. And it's been a debate in the genre, the words and the music. And as we all know, I don't want to give a spoiler to this, but it's so important to have both of them work together well. So we're now going to turn to our panelists. Their bios are on the conference webpage, and you can read the longer discussion there and all their incredible accomplishments and affiliations. I'll mention them all now in the order in which they'll give their initial presentation. And then I'm going to say just a couple of words about the relationship to the text, le parole, that these three panelists have had. George Lewis is a composer and scholar who has, I think, wonderfully turned his attention to opera. His opera Afterward, which we were able to watch together for the YouTube premiere last night, but that also is on the conference website and it continues to be available and you can watch it anytime through the conference. And then beyond, we're hoping, and you'll get more information about that. The genesis of the libretto for this opera is a little unusual, and that's what I like about this panel. I tried to give you some of the norms, and then we've got something new that's happening today. Not uncommon for George Lewis, for Afterward, I should say, is that this libretto was adapted from a book that happened all the time in the 19th century up to the present. What is innovative is that George Lewis wrote this book, A Power Stronger Than Itself, the AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, and the American Experimental Music. This book was published by the University of Chicago Press in 2008. So not only did he write the book, literally the book for the opera, but then he decided to take this book and write an opera, and he created the libretto himself. IONE is an author, playwright, director, filmmaker, and improvising text sound artist. She's created several multimedia works, including other operas or her other operas, Njinga, excuse me, The Queen King, a dance opera in primeval time, and the lunar opera, Lincoln, for Lincoln Center Out of Doors. With her creative partner and spouse, Pauline Oliveros, they began the opera Nubian Word for Flowers, a phantom opera that was then completed in 2017, 1 year after Oliveros passed. We have the opportunity to watch this opera, the Nubian Word for Flowers, a phantom opera, this evening. We'll watch the YouTube premiere from 7 to 9 Eastern Daylight Time, and it will also be available through the rest of the conference, and hopefully it'll be available afterwards and you'll get information about that. And then we have Sharan Strange, who is a poet and a librettist and has been working with different innovative groups. She's groups. She's a founding member of the Darkroom Collective, and she's been a co-curator of the Darkroom Reading Series. Her poem, Yet Unheard, lyrically and powerfully explores the situation around Sandra Bland's death. This work was then set as an opera by Courtney Bryan and was performed by Helga Davis and an ensemble chorus and orchestra. And I'm pretty sure that she has other operatic libretto projects in the works, and she can tell us about those. So thank you for your time in listening to these things. We will spend the rest of our time with our panelists, and let's start with George Lewis.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Naomi, that was fantastic. Your introductions are exciting. Just like yesterday, it was really great, very inspiring. So yeah, I'm not going to take too much time with this because we have a lot to discuss, and I thought I would share my screen with you for a few minutes. It's a little bit of inside baseball about Afterward, you know. I mean, yeah, and as Naomi said, I wrote the libretto, and it came from this sort of 700-page academic book, which is a pretty unlikely place to get a libretto from. And then the other side of it is that, you know, I felt while I was doing it, and maybe even afterwards, it was a bit like what they say about if you represent yourself in court as a lawyer, you have a fool for a client. So I felt like I had a fool for a librettist, but I just hung in there, just like Parsifal, pure fool, go for it. You know, and so, you know, that, you know, where it worked out or whatever. But another thing that you said, Naomi, which was very interesting for me, was that you quoted from Monteverdi, first the words, then the music. And I took that in two senses. First, when I was writing Afterward, I got stuck on a number of things. It was my first opera, what did I know about it? I got a lot of help from Sean Griffin, who directed, who coached, who did movement, Catherine Sullivan, who did incredible movement and staging and sets. But still, where was the libretto going to come from for this book about the AACM, not to mention the music? And so once I decided I would do it myself, I had a talk with Peter Kotick, the composer, and he said, well, you got to do the words first. If you don't have a libretto, you can't do anything. So, and I didn't realize how far back that sentiment went. Now, for the new opera, which I'm going to talk about in passing, I'm writing an opera based on a short story by W.E.B. Du Bois, The Comet, directed by Yuval Sharon, and The Comet, which basically the Earth passes through the tail of a comet, and it appears that many people, if not the entire planet, is dead, except for, by happenstance, a white woman and a black man. And so this ends up being a place for Du Bois to speak about the regime of white supremacy and what sustains it in a social sense, because he, was a sociologist. Now, the thing is, for this, that's one side of it, but the actual opera is called The Comet Popea. And this is where we get back to Monteverdi, because the pieces, there are two operas basically going on at the same time. There's the Coronation of Popea and my opera, The Comet. And so basically I'm caught between two librettists, not me this time, but Douglas Kearney, who's worked with Yuval Sharon on a number of projects, and Busanello, who wrote the libretto for the Monteverdi opera and a couple of others. So yeah, let me do, for those who really don't remember, didn't hear about the AACM, it was founded on the South Side of Chicago in 1965. It's played a really important international role in American experimental music, thinking about improvisation, extended technique, intermedia, computer music, invented instruments, all kinds of stuff. And so, and also artistic communitarianism and personal and collective self-determination. So the thing is that, I'm okay in German. I'm getting better now that I'm here in Berlin. And so basically I thought, well, we know about the Bildungsroman, the coming of age novel. And so what I thought this was going to be was a Bildungsoper, which is to say a coming of age opera by people, young Black experimentalists who were trying to find themselves. And so the opera was supposed to talk about that process, thinking about, it was interesting that in the Czech premiere, which I'm going to tell you about, or the Avant premiere, I'm going to show you a little bit of, the person who translated the libretto into Czech said that it reminded him of the idea of the community voice from Toni Morrison. That is to say, instead of having fixed characters like, I was going to think, well, who's going to play Muhal? I said, everybody will play Muhal. And everyone will play Roscoe Mitchell, and everyone will play Amina Claudia Myers. And so we're going to have different people. They're avatars, really, and not fixed characters. And that was very important, because you could think of these things as being subject positions played out by different characters, by different avatars, or you could think about the whole opera as taking place inside a single person's mind, and all of the conflicts that go on as one tries to find oneself. And of course, there's a precedent there if you think about the setting for Hans-Jürgen Sieberberg's film of Parsifal, where the whole thing takes place inside Wagner's head, a big fat set based on Wagner's head. So anyway, afterward, the libretto was based on interviews I made with the AACM members for the book. And there's a certain poetry about the interviews. I'm not a creative writer, and so where am I going to get this material? Well, it turned out there are all these very creative talkers, and they said amazing things. And also Muhal Richard Abrams recorded a lot of the meetings for the formation of the AACM. So all these people get up and they start talking, and what they say is so amazingly beautiful. And so they're starting to think about authority, their interrogation of power, identity, self-representation, self-fashioning, all kinds of things. And so I'm going to show you how things got from one of these how things get from the book to the stage. So I'm going to share the screen at this point. I hope it works. Let's just see. Okay. All right. Let's just hope this thing works and sound and everything. Hold on a second here. I'm still not ready for that. I'm going to try again because I'm never quite sure how this thing works. You know, we'll try one more time. Okay. Good. All right. I think that looks pretty good. Okay. Now, next step. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. Share sound and go. What you should be seeing, and I hope you are seeing this, is you should be seeing a person playing the saxophone
Yes,
with
we
a
see
with a
everything.
with a bunch of people in a band. One of whom is a very sleepy trombonist wearing a tie, and that would be me back in the day, 1975. So, and Eugene Easton, who is the saxophonist taking the solo. You might see other people in there, you know, Henry Threadgill, Pete Cozy, Chico Freeman, others. Was one of the early signatories to the ACM Charter, and he'll be the one that's talking as they are in a meeting in 1965, talking to just themselves about where they want to go in their lives. Okay, let's just see if I can hear this, okay? All right, so you can see that. Let me know, tell me, wave your hands if you don't hear the words.
I think we're getting closer to this, to an explanation of this term, original music. Among some of us, it means something a little deeper than others. Original, in one sense, means something you write in the particular system that we are locked up with now in this society. We express ourselves in this system because it's what we learn. And as we learn more of other systems of music around the world, I mean, it's quite natural today, and we are getting closer to the music that our ancestors played and which we are denied the right to really stretch out in. And this term original, I feel that the authors of this business structure here had in mind more so sound-conscious musicians, if necessary, finding a complete new system that expresses us. If you don't express in that is known, you're ostracized.
Now, to me, that's a critical passage, which is also in the book as a moment where people start to realize what's at stake when they start to take over their own lives, where they don't let people call them jazz musicians anymore, and where they decide that they're going to be creative musicians. And what does it mean to be creative musicians? Well, they don't have to define what creativity is. All they have to do is, that's us, that's what we do, we're creative, which is totally in opposition to the way they're being regarded by the society. So right away, that's an act of importance and transgressive self-determination. And then the key is that they see music as a means by which they get out of it. They say we're locked up with a certain music in a society. That's not just the music they're locked up with. This is 1965. You know? I mean, like they've been locked up for like 400 years. And so, you know, and so talking about music around the world, this sort of incipient cosmopolitanism, getting close to the music our ancestors played. What does that mean? A kind of, does it mean like a diasporan return? What does that really mean? So a complete new system that expresses us, who we are. And so I didn't see where we needed to change that much in order to make a libretto out of that. And so you're going to see three people basically playing this section. And if you like, you could think of, I'm going to set the scene for you. The woman in the middle, the soprano, is sort of playing a composite of, let's see, Amina Claudine Myers and a couple of other people. And she has just decided to take off the stupid wig she was wearing and to put it away, the blonde wig, to remove that. And then the Gwendolyn Brown, the contralto, you could say that she's playing Muhal Abrams, but it's not clear as to what that is. She's playing, because there are a lot of people she could be playing. And the speech is being sung by Julian Terrell Otis.
I think I see it now. A system we're locked up with now in this society. it's what we learned. As we learn more about the systems around the world, we found there is expression on a much higher level than we had been led to believe. Original means sound conscious musicians getting closer to the music our ancestors played, finding a complete new system that expresses us. We will be locked up in this system for the rest of our days, unless we find ourselves as a people. We're going to the vote right now! All people are promoting ourselves! By saying,
Yeah, so that's pretty much what they did. They always had Robert's Rules of Order. It was very interesting listening to the meeting tapes because someone said, well, maybe we should use Robert Rules of Order. And someone else said, well, what's that? And they said, well, I have a book here. And so they ended up using that. As far as I know, the ASM still uses Robert's Rules of Order in 2021. So that's all I have to say on that for now. We could, maybe we could go on to someone else now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. And it's just a thank you for showing us a little excerpt, sort of reminding us of this sound. I know there'll be a lot of questions, so write them down and feel free to put them in the chat, and let's move on to IONE. Welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Well, we were speaking that was wonderful, by the way, George. Just enjoyed
Thank
that
you, Al.
so much. Yeah. The connection between librettist and composer was something that Pauline and I discussed, or we felt the weight of it through many projects, particularly our large theater works, and what to call me and what to call her and different things. She was always a composer. These are always deeply collaborative works between us, and they were collaborative in different ways. And then we also expanded out to work with internationally with many other artists. In particular, with Nubian Word for Flowers, I discovered, because many people don't know how it actually began, I'm just going to give you a little history of that. And I just discovered, again, some writing of Pauline that Pauline did about it in 2016 in July. So she says the impetus for the Nubian Word for Flowers began in Kitchener, Ontario, where this is 2006, and I was wondering if the name of the town Kitchener had a connection to Kitchener Island in the Nile River in Egypt, that I had visited during many trips to Egypt as a journalist and a teacher beginning in the late 80s up to the present time. So Pauline writes, IONE began research and learned that the Ontario town had been renamed from Berlin, speaking of Berlin, to Kitchener as an homage to Lord Herbert Horatio Kitchener, who was England's Secretary of State for War during World War I. Now, just to jump forward for a second, I want to say that this particular person being in this opera is important because he turns out to be a pivotal point for our lives today in the Middle East, our lives today in terms of Muslim extremism, our lives today in terms of peace or war between many of our countries. Long history, but he personally was there for these decisions. So IONE was inspired by the complexity of a man who was not only known as a cruel commander in war, but also a gifted botanist, a man who was known as a lord of war, but who also ironically was known to have respect for the culture of the Nubian people. What was that about? I began writing while we were still in Kitchener, Ontario. These writings are published in Nile Night, Remembered Text from the Deep, and are performed by IONE internationally, partly as improvisations with me. This is Pauline writing. So in 2008, IONE was developing script for Nubian Word, and we were discussing a new opera that included the diaspora of the Nubian people flooded out of their homelands by the construction of the Aswan Dam in 1963. And our first development was with Yuval Sharon as well in First Take, in which we were able to bring our Kitchener. I wanted to cross cast at that juncture, and I brought in Ashraf Suwalin from Cairo, who was just able to come at that one point to do that, which was really, really quite marvelous. We had a lot of magical things that happened throughout the journey, long journey of creating the opera, including an old friend of Pauline's in Cairo, who's, when I told him I wanted to cross cast, and she said, oh, I think I've got somebody. And when we were looking for the Nubian boatman, she said, oh, I think I know the Nubian boatman. And the Nubian boatman is actually, had been a Nubian boatman, is a composer, quite beautiful, joined our cast later on. Composer that we were able to work with over distance. Some of our first research and working we did from Venice. We went to Venice and had a residency there. I was very interested in this conjunction of Venice and Egypt, which is an ancient pathways. I wanted to go by boat, but that would have taken us 3 weeks to do that based on schedules. But we did fly there and had our first meetings with beautiful Zakaria Ibrahim, so that we could bring the actual music of the Nubian people into the opera and Nubanur. What's different about this is that we're working hand in hand on the idea, the context is coming from me, but then we're working very, very solidly together on creating this piece together. So it's not as though the term librettist would serve for me. So I always use terms like words or text, and don't just let go of librettist completely. So the difference here, as I'm looking back on it, is that we were performing. So in performance, I'm improvising. I'm in the moment, and I'm listening for the sounds. So the words are uniquely connected to sound for me and to the moment of listening. So in performing with Pauline, this is what we were doing. We were just in these sonic moments, and the words that were coming, as I said before, uniquely connected to the sounds of the words. and meaning is not sought for originally. So this whole thing began, and we were doing this up in Ontario, and then we continued. Then I published some of what I had written down, what I was hearing, what I was seeing, and we continued to do this live. And so I have some of that text. I think it might be interesting to hear it. The original images were coming and sounds were coming, right? So this is from Nile Night. This is all Egyptian stuff in here. Lord Kitchener smiles. Lord Kitchener smiles and takes another sip of Karkade. His cup is from the finest china. All is right with the world. He is the center of the merry-go-round. Off stage, carousel horses champing at their bits laugh. They are pulling the circle round and round. Elephants shuffling step by step, side by side, skin to skin, speaking in code, listening through their feet for the sounds of their family not so far away. We are here. We are safe. We will survive this. The heavy laden island breathes a sigh of relief. Palm fronds brushing, magnolias straining each to each, vying for their scents. Bougainvilleas, jasmine, clematis, hibiscus, crying sweet smells of intimacy. This, their endless war. The boatman awaits Lord Kitchener in the dark, while back across the water at the Winter Palace, a woman in white approaches her long mirror, a small box on a low table, opens to reveal one tiny mirror after another. There is no turning back from her journey. Lord Kitchener sets forth across the Black River. A seed from each variety sinks lower into moist soil. The flowering island breathes a sigh of acceptance. We will survive this. So whenever I got lost or in the creation of the actual opera, I would dip back to that moment of the two of them on the island, an island that I know that it still exists. We could all go there today if we wanted to, maybe. So the importance of that particular connection that we actually were able to do this together and collaborate on it in that kind of intimacy. It's very, 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 very important.
Thank you so much for bringing us into that world and the world that you and Pauline were in and the journeys you made from Venice, from other places, and then sort of figuring out that there's a story here. Thank you.
Yes,
I know we're ready for questions. However, almost there. I'm really looking forward to hearing poet and creator and librettist Sharan Strange speak with us now.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to the International Contemporary Ensemble for inviting me to participate in this process. And to Naomi. And it's just such a privilege to be on this panel with IONE and George Lewis. Their phenomenal works, really just sort of paving the way for someone who, like me, is a neophyte to this whole scene, not having had any experience with opera in terms of writing for it. And I have to make a disclaimer first that Yet Unheard isn't an opera. It's a very short work that I collaborated with Courtney Bryan on, but Courtney and I we are working on another operatic piece. It's kind of too early to really talk about that, to go into that. And I am working on some other works that, to use the term yesterday from Tyshawn's and Julia's panel, operatic space. So it's working in that operatic space, and really Yet Unheard, I guess, in the context of opera would be an aria, but it is okay. So just to clarify that, but I wanted to see if I could just very quickly sort of walk through the process of collaboration with Courtney, and if I can get yes, I think I can get my screen here to sort of look at my notes. All right, so I want to just as quickly as possible kind of walk through this. But Yet Unheard was commissioned by the Dream Unfinished Orchestra. It's an activist orchestra in New York City. And so when Un Lee, the director of the orchestra, reached out to Courtney to include her in a program that they were doing in the summer of 2016 called Sing Her Name. And it was to honor Black women composers, and especially to honor Sandra Bland on the 1-year anniversary of her death. Courtney then reached out to me to write the piece. Courtney and I had met about maybe 2 years earlier at a conference, and were just sort of like mutually interested in each other's work. And so it was delightful to then be able to actually work on something with her. And also, you know, we really had a trio here, because Courtney also had in mind the vocalist Helga Davis, Helga, whom you all heard yesterday, was the third part of this collaboration. And so we started out, I guess, you know, it's wonderful to get that history, that understanding that people often do consider that the text comes first. But in terms of collaborating, I wanted to start out with a process of listening to music. So Courtney and I began by listening to works together. And here's a sampling of some of the works that we listened to: orchestral works, jazz, spiritual. George, you're in there. We listened to some of your pieces. And so these are just some examples of some of the people we listened to. And then what we both did was sort of, you know, she suggested these pieces as sort of the things that were influencing her, or things that she had been listening to. So I call it Courtney's sort of canon at the moment that we started working together. And these are my notes. So I was listening with the way of thinking about, how does the music feel? What does it evoke in me? What are some of the ways that I would describe what I'm hearing? So these are the notes that you're looking at. And again, a range of works across those different genres. And I highlighted here Jasper Drag by Alvin Singleton, because what I also wanted to think about was how I was going to work with the figure of Sandra Bland. And I decided that his piece is an homage to James Byrd. And there was a poem by Lucille Clifton called Jasper, Texas. And in that poem, we hear the voice of James Byrd in there. And so that sort of influenced, in a way, my approach to working with Sandra Bland's voice in Yet Unheard. So then one of the things I also said is, like, we need to, I need to know your language, Courtney. I'm doing words, but I don't have this knowledge. I haven't been trained as a musician. I don't know anything about music except my personal enjoyment of it. And just, things that I have learned through studying. I took a course with Eileen Southern. So I have this, you know, relationship to understanding about Black music, but I don't have the kind of relationship with the music that a musician has. And so here's the lexicon that Courtney came up with. And I said, this is the way you're thinking about how you put the music together. So this is her language. So my notes and her language together, I think kind of created a lexicon for the piece. And so then if I can, I'll just play just a brief excerpt. So I call these the composer's notes and a mood sketch, and you probably can't read it very well. The captions are very small, but these were Courtney's notes on the text once I gave her the text, and here are parts of the text. But if I can, let me just play a little sampling. I'm going to stop it there. It's a part where it goes on a little further and you hear the sense of a chorus coming in. And we were working with a full orchestra, with a full chorus. So some of these notes, as we had the discussions about how the piece might translate from the poem into the piece, we had these discussions around how we would use the chorus. But what you heard there, I think was just, you know, just some of the instrumentalism that she was thinking about and how she might use those lexicons, that lexicon of sounds to capture the mood, the spirit of the piece. And then I want to play a little clip of Helga actually singing the piece. And then you can hear that incorporation of the orchestra in. Okay, well, that's not happening. But I'll just say the piece is on YouTube. You can find it. Initially, we premiered it in New York. Why does it always escape me? Cooper Union. And then the following summer, Courtney revised it and we did a chamber version. And the chamber premiere was at Ojai, the Ojai Music Festival. And so this is what that clip would have represented, Helga singing on stage at Ojai from Yet Unheard. And I'm so sorry that I couldn't pull it up just now. But what I wanted to say about the piece too is that it also worked with the notion of Sandra Bland telling her story. So we started out with this question in terms of how to represent the work that we were commissioned to create. We started out with this question of what happened to Sandra Bland. And so we went through this process of listening to music together, thinking about our own vocabulary, and then I wrote the piece. And I wrote the piece with this sense of there being a chorus who would represent community, and Sandra Bland speaking to her community. As you know, Sandra Bland in the last months of her life was actually doing video posts on Facebook. She was doing this video blog, speaking to a community and particularly speaking to young Black people. She had been catalyzed by Black Lives Matter. And so she was putting her voice out there, and she would end her podcast by saying, "Sandy speaks." And so that was an impetus for me to let Sandra Bland speak in the piece. So it is a persona poem, but it's also structured in the sense of me, again, thinking about I'm writing for a piece that an orchestra will perform, that a chorus will perform. And so you get this sense of community through all this chorus of voices. But the privileged voice here is Sandra Bland telling her story, telling what happened to her. And I think I'm out of time there, so I'll stop and maybe say more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad the PowerPoint or the slides worked. It adds so much. It adds so much for the three of you when you bring in both the voice that you're writing in words, as well as whether it's from a clip or something, a clip of the an aria or part of the work, the soundscape that's created, a reading, a text from it. Thank you guys so much for doing this. I'm wondering if you've got questions for each other. There are a couple of questions which are wonderful that are appearing in the chat, so I'll weave those in, or if you've seen them, you can ask. But if there anything, so frequently a benefit of being on a panel is you get to see other people you admire and you can ask them things. So this is a great time.
Well, I wanted to start out just by asking because, first of all, it's just astonishing the interplay between George's book and libretto and the work, and then also the beautiful, the poetry that IONE created through this understanding of the history and the people that whose community she was also trying to capture. So I just wanted, I guess, to ask a question about the kind of research that went into that process. I mean, I have some sense from George's introduction that he relied a lot on the actual transcripts of conversations. But I'm curious about the research process for both of you that, sort of engaged your sense of how to put together your texts.
Well, I'll just say quickly, deep research.
Yes.
And the more that I found, the more important the whole project became, and it has it continues. There's more to come. We had this beautiful opening at Roulette, International Contemporary Ensemble, and experiments in opera, and wonderful cast and so on. And yet we know that more of this researched information can be highlighted because it's important to us today, to our lives today. As I said, so I was researching continually online and every which way I could find. Yeah.
IONE, could you say more about the Egyptian connection? I was very interested in that. It just went by so quick. I feel like I should catch that.
Yeah, well, the Egyptian connection is very, very strong. You see, as I had started as a journalist and going there and had discovered the Nubian people had discovered me. Actually, this was in the 80s before many other people of color were going to Egypt, and they said, they claimed me, and I claimed, and I said, yeah, this is home, I'm home. So they understand who I am and so forth. Later discovering that all was not well in that community, that these extraordinarily beautiful, deep and peaceful people had been pushed out of their homes which were completely destroyed by the when the Aswan Dam was put up by the Russians and the English and all of us, so completely subsumed by all underwater, lots underwater. Some were saved, and the Nubian people themselves discriminated against and placed in bunkers. They had beautiful, you see some of their beautiful colors, the homes, many animals were lost, all kinds. So I journeyed to many of those temples that were saved, some of them, but knowing that underneath the water, there were the souls of the Nubian people. So it was, this is a core to the story. And as it turns out, the Nubian boatman turned out also to be in an historical being who was the first language of the Nubian people that was created. It was called the Nubian boatman story.
Mhm.
And so I was speaking with Nubian scholars to get this information and incorporated this concept into the opera. So it's the flowing of the original Nubian boatman and his story, and the concept of language is also important to me. So I had the Nubian language coming forward in his music, but also visually on scrims. That's always been very important to me in terms of research. With Jinga, I was very important to have the Kimbundu language there. The actual language of the people was always present. So does that help? That's just a touch of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And building off that, I want to jump in a little bit. It would be not that I'm trying to make any comparisons, but just how that part of the world has been an operatic theme before. At the end of the 19th century in 1871 with Giuseppe Verdi's Aida, and how we know from that how he did not have any interest in going to Egypt or Ethiopia or that area, that he was older, the trip was tough. And so this was a piece entirely of his own imagination, as he says. And that was sort of an odd libretto situation because he had some helpers, and then Gisela Anzoni was the versifier. But the point is, there in 1871, you've got a certain time where Egypt and Ethiopia are sort of made up, going back to pharaonic times when it's set. Whereas Ione, you and Pauline Oliveros, you were there. And this idea of Nubia, the Sudan and Ethiopia, those areas, and Egypt it's like there's and you weave in through Kitchener, this world of colonialism and sort of the horror of protecting flowers, yet not protecting people. So it's like opera is visiting a certain area, but with a very different engaged view of actually going there and talking about things. So that's, I sort of wanted to jump in just on what George was asking about Egypt, but please feel free to jump in.
Well, may I just say quickly that just to give you one of the things that happened is that the very first war with machine guns happened via Kitchener with the Nubian people with the Battle of Khartoum, which is how he got to be really very famous with Queen Victoria. Now, there had been no machine guns prior to that. Pauline was we were interested in this sonically and getting these war sounds. She wanted to have all of that. But wave after wave of the Nubians came up over and they were shot down by the machine guns. And Churchill was also a very young man in that particular battle. And he also wrote about that. And there's more to that. But just to give you an idea of understanding what that meant in terms of warfare and in terms of what so-called bravery these Nubians coming up over. Oh, they were so brave, the English people said. Yes, they were brave. Yeah. So this is part of it.
And what you believe in, right? Bravery versus survival, and how that's that scene. We have a wonderful audience here asking us questions. And for the panelists, they're in the Q&A, they're in the chat, and I'm going to jump into a few of them. This is one. How have you protected your text as you collaborate with the composer and have your works published? Is there more that can be done beyond the copyright? So I think this is an interesting question. And if it's possible to have as many of you want to talk about this sort of quickly, because we've got a bunch of different questions, especially since some of you are the poet and the librettist and the composer. I don't know if this was meant, do we want to start with Sharan with this one?
I don't think I know how to answer that question just yet. I mean, I've registered my work, but beyond that, I think I'll defer to people who have more experience in that way. Yeah, but that's an interesting question for me to think about. Yeah. Because I'm not sure if it just means protected in a legal sense, but I'm thinking about this other way of thinking about work when it's collaborative and when it's written for a larger community, so my mind sort of goes off in other philosophical tangents, so.
That's fine. And it feels like a particularly helpful, perhaps industry question. It sounds like the collaborative experience that all three of you have had with the musicians, and George, it's sort of like you together, but that might be sort of subsumed in that. We've got some really fun questions, just a quick one. George, could you share some thoughts about the juxtaposition of the quotes from Charles Lloyd and Fred Moten in your backdrop?
Well, that's actually from another talk I gave on voice and how I use it with a different piece called Anthem. And it's the beginning of the talk, someone was interviewing Charles Lloyd about his music. And they said, well, how does your music work? And he said, well, words don't go there. And I can hear him saying this, right? Words don't go there. And so I can hear Fred saying in his super bass baritone, well, where do words go? and where do words go is a fascinating topic, because you start to sort of see how it is that he starts to spin out this idea about how, the problem with trying to construct a text for me, and I had to construct the text for Afterword, is that words, and let me see how you feel about this. This is one of the odd things about opera and any sort of piece, with text, music, is kind of pokey compared to words, I mean,
it takes a while.
Yeah, you say one word and immediately there's 2,000 associations in your head. In the meantime, the music is just cranking up and it's got to take some form. And so what do? So in Afterword, I just stopped talking for a while and let the music catch up. It's real straightforward. Some people get annoyed by it. It's like those people you talk to and they take these long pauses. And just when you think you can talk again, they talk again. So that's what it really means, is that words move at the speed of thought.
Oh, now that's pretty profound to hold on to that. But as a composer, and you get to stretch the words or make them quick or make us listen to what's happening in the music. I just love how opera can sort of, the music can support the words, so we know, yes, they're in harmony, but the words can also say no, or the music can say, no, the words are lying. This isn't a nice person. There's like a lot of scary stuff underneath. So, I mean, what makes opera so amazing. I've got some more questions here. Somebody who's thanking IONE and Sharan for presentations. I'm curious to hear how you negotiate in the creation process the difference between the written word, the sung word, and how music alters the nature of how we experience text, and also how you negotiate improvisation in the context of the structure of your works relative to the specified text. So really thoughtful, complicated questions. Ione or Sharon, yeah, please jump in.
I didn't know if I wanted to answer that. I certainly have an answer, but some of an answer. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sharon.
Mhm.
Go, Sharon.
Go
Well,
ahead.
I was just going to say, and I was trying to get at some of that in the presentation, but I realized I needed to, kind of move through it really quickly. But it's such a beautiful process for me because it does make me think about the words in such a way, because I start to think, I mean, it's not that I don't do this already as a poet, thinking about the sort of emotional valences of words. But then that's why I thought the lexicon, what I call the lexicon, I told Courtney, we need a lexicon, right? That bridging of the your language, my language, where does it meet? And that understanding, we have the notion of poetry as being elliptical. And so you can think about, the music as something that enters into those gaps, or the music as something that also creates or exploits that, exploits the notion of those gaps and leaves the audience a way to kind of bridge those things too, in terms of their relationship to what they're hearing and musically and literarily with the language. So I just feel like that's such a great question. I don't want to go on and on and on, but it's just, I would just say that what it does for me as someone who isn't trained in music and also is entering into this new landscape of classical and new music and contemporary opera, is that it really helps me to think about how the words, how the text and the music meet, and not even necessarily to privilege one over the other, but to understand that there is that tension between the two. There is that symbiosis, or that symbiosis between the two. And that's where the excitement lies, in kind of negotiating that.
So beautifully said, because we saw earlier these tensions of music first, words first, maybe a symbiosis is like they're to each other. Ione, it feels like this question really relates to a lot of what you were saying on how the language, so you listen to the words in the language and you're participating, not a spoiler alert for what's coming up tonight, but you're actually one of the performers as sort of a narrator or embodying a bunch of words, not just having written them, but speaking them.
Yeah, in this case, this is a totally different hybrid for me. So there are two different things. One is when I'm improvising, the word trust has to be in there for me. So it's trusting that what is coming through and my connection to the music that's happening, that Pauline is making, it's usually Pauline and me, that the words that come this are the sound, also the sounds that are necessary to come at that moment, so that there's a trust factor, and it's very, very powerful and very, very special to do, because you just have to be out there on a limb, so to speak, sonically. But then there's other kind of words, like words that I've written before, that like in Pauline's 4 Meditations for Orchestra, that the most recent final of that was done in Belgium, is me actually intoning words I've written already for her piece. So that's another kind of thing of improvisation, but it's based on actual words that exist prior to that. So it's lots of subtleties and beautiful subtleties. Yeah.
What I so appreciate about this conversation is that we could just keep on going. Words are needed to explain and talk more. And unfortunately, we're wrapping up. I'm wondering if there are things that you want to say. I'm going to read a couple of questions and you can all address them. And if we could have each of you. So 2 points. One is, in creating your text, how did you begin to create your own lane? So we've talked about this collaboration. How is there sort of a space for the text? And then how does the tonality of words and their rhythms impact the way you set or line the text and music? How does this drive forward the overall energy of operatic space? And I'm loving that people are using that, this operatic space where it's presented. These are in the Q&A if you're sort of looking for them now. And can we start with you, George?
Oh boy, the tonality of words, rhythm, I mean, Sharon and I don't know about that kind of stuff. I really don't. I'm just trying to get through the day. I mean, really, you don't want to ask me that kind of stuff. I'm going to punt that question completely to the people who really know how to do
it. Sure.
Have at it.
Question, what's the question again?
Okay, so there are two. One, how do you create, when you're creating the text, how do you create your own lane? And then is there sort of the tonality of the words, the rhythm, the rhythmic impact, does that, how does that align sort of text and music? How does this drive towards the overall operatic space where it's presented? Sort of, what are the words creating to the drama?
Well, hopefully they're creating everything that's needed. It's all a process, and again, this flexibility, I think, is extremely important. Our creation, getting Nubian Word for Flowers to roulette was a masterwork in flexibility and intense courage and trust, and all of that is important to creating anything important, I think, in theater or anywhere else. But this is talk about theater and opera. So you're listening all the time. You're listening and being open to what's happening around you. Helga mentioned this stillness being yesterday, the concept of stillness, as many people are involved, so in bringing this into a completed work, or a work that can continue to be completed. So all of that is happening, and you have to be ready to change what's not working as well.
I would just add to also, like, I think about embodiment. Embodiment is important. I think about like how we, I know what I want to say, but I also need to be able to feel it in my body. Like the way I feel the language of the music in my body. So the linguistic and the sonic, together, we have to have a sonic truth, so like the whole of it makes for a sonic truth. And so I think that is also something that's an embodied sense of that truth. So
I love that sonic truth.
I do too. And this embodiment. George, you want to jump in?
Well, I'm just putting something in the chat.
Sonic youth to sonic truth. I'm with you. It makes you move, makes you feel.
So I can do that kind of thing from time to time. Now, I don't know, how much time do we have? Because
we got 2 minutes.
Okay, well, then maybe, I don't know what to say. Somebody wrote a question about the idea of Black liberatory art making and how librettists can serve the field with new language to describe what Blackness in opera can be. What the thing is, and maybe that's going to come up, I'm in another panel about constructing the operatic Afro-Diaspora. And so what Blackness in opera is going to be constructed by us, really, and others. It's a communitarian situation. And so if those movements are pointed toward liberation, it seems to me that we have to think about what it means to be liberated. For me, it's kind of mobility. In other words, we can go anywhere we want with it, and that would be the kind of liberation I'm personally interested in. And against the people who thought that, who asked me to self-stereotype in terms of what the sound of the opera could be or whatever. And so it seemed to me that I was listening to Wagner a lot, and the stuff is about Parsifal, like the 13th century, I mean, they didn't have like late romantic harmony in the 13th century. So, so I mean, like, so I was, so he didn't feel the need to fake that, and I don't either.
I so appreciate this conversation. Thank you each for bringing in sort of, as we talk about these different operatic spaces that feel comfortable and uncomfortable, the terms of librettist or not feeling like a librettist. I'm really drawn by how having these Black voices in opera, it's not necessarily a welcoming space. And I want to thank you for explaining that, but also giving us words for how we talk about this space and making it our own. I think we are out of time. Thank you so much. And we look forward to these musical moments that we'll be having.
Thank you, everyone. This was great. It's great to be with you.
So beautiful. Thank you, International Contemporary also. And all the panelists, so beautiful. Bridget,
Thanks.
Yeah.
Ross.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for that great opera last night and for the great one we're going to have tonight. So see you all later.
See you all soon. Bye.